What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. This Belgian princess rose to become Mexico's empress. From there everything broke down. Before their empire fell, Carlota and her husband Maximilian I attempted to rule Mexico, which broke her heart and mind. The Belgian princess seemed to be content with her intelligence, love, and beauty. Her engagement to Maximilian, the brother of the Austrian emperor, at the age of 17 was not only for political alliances but also out of love. She had avoided the loveless marriages that were frequently the fate of royalty. The young bride got married to a man she liked physically and intellectually. They would make their way to North America, where they would eventually become Emperor and Empress of Mexico. The new Empress, who was born Marie Charlotte, came to be known more widely as Carlota. Personal happiness, however, could not reckon with the turbulent geopolitics of the mid-19th century. In 1864, spurred by a lifelong quest to find a meaningful role, Carlota and her husband embarked on a catastrophic adventure to rule Mexico. Tragically, her husband passed away as a result of the unsuccessful endeavor. Soon after, Carlota's mental health deteriorated, and she spent her long time as a widow in isolation. The contented Princess Carlota was born in 1840 and grew up to be King Leopold I of Belgium's favorite child. The country had only been created 9 years before her birth, after it seceded from the Northern Netherlands in 1831. Leopold's second marriage produced the princess and her 3 brothers. His first had been to Charlotte, Princess of Wales, daughter of England's future George IV. In 1817, Charlotte had given birth and died. Leopold married Louise d'Orleans in 1832, but he never got over his first wife. He gave his newborn daughter the name Charlotte more than 2 decades after she passed away. Carlota's childhood would be heavily influenced by the Belgian king's connections to the English monarchy. She was influenced by Queen Victoria, the niece of her father, while she spent her vacations at Windsor Castle. Carlota's mother passed away from tuberculosis when she was 10 years old. According to Carlota appeared to have a happy childhood despite the loss, according to Macallan's Maximilian and Carlota, Europe's last empire in Mexico. Her father became more attentive, which helped her. Leopold, the first king of Belgium, brought his young, well-read daughter on state business to see firsthand his renowned diplomatic abilities. Maximilian on Carlota: she is extremely intelligent, which is concerning. But no doubt I will get over that. The Archduchess was enraged. In 1856, at age 15, she met and fell in love with Archduke Maximilian, 8 years her senior. He was the younger brother of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph. Maximilian shared her desire for liberalism and reform, in addition to being charming and attractive. Maximilian's feelings for Carlota did not, at first, seem to match hers for him. She is very clever, which is a little concerning, but I'll get over the fact that he wrote to Franz Joseph, possibly in jest. Following the marriage, which took place just after the bride's 17th birthday in 1857, the newlyweds sought a role for themselves. Archduchess Carlota wanted to practice her ideals about reform, while Maximilian's lifelong plight as the spare to his brother's role as heir spurred him to find a meaningful job. An opportunity came along when Franz Joseph promoted Maximilian to governor of Lombardy-Venetia in what is today northern Italy. The position, however, came with some problematic strings attached. Maximilian was expected to quell the Italian nationalists rebelling against Austrian rule. I can feel the thorns already, observed Carlota, but I can also foresee the satisfaction from doing something good. Maximilian tried to win over the nationalists by granting them more autonomy, but Franz Joseph wanted a firmer hand. Maximilian hesitated to act militarily when Napoleon III of France sent troops to support the Italians at the end of 1858, which enraged his brother. He was removed after being demoted. A year later, Austria lost Lombardy but was able to retain Venice. Retire royally. Maximilian and Carlota sought to salve their disappointment by building a fairy tale castle, Miramare, on the Adriatic Sea near Trieste. They lived on site, and although Carlota was content for a while, planning the grounds, painting and playing the piano, cracks began to appear in their marriage. Maximilian's alleged salacious behavior, including love affairs and visits to brothels, came to light. Whether Carlota knew of his affairs is uncertain, but gossip circulated that the Archduke was not welcome in her bed. The couple's inability to bear children only fueled more rumors. International developments would present Maximilian and Carlota another opportunity to rule. Their next adventure would take them to North America, across the ocean rather than Europe. Mexico had thrown off Spanish rule in 1821, although Spain would not recognize its independence until 1836. Relocating to Mexico after that, there was political unrest, but in 1860 liberal forces led by Benito Juárez took over the country. Mexico's northern neighbor, the United States, recognized Juárez's government but was too occupied with its own civil war to provide him much support. Europe perceived Mexico as vulnerable, and Napoleon III of France desired it for himself. Encouraged by Mexican conservatives and Catholics, France invaded in 1862 and occupied Mexico City. To rule his new empire, Napoleon installed a European royal, Archduke Maximilian. Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph approved the appointment of his younger brother, but he advised Maximilian to insist on French military support and to be sure he was accepted as emperor by a majority of Mexicans. France held what many historians regard as a sham referendum that showed popular backing for Maximilian's rule in Mexico. The tragic Empress. Carlota saw the chance to rule Mexico as a noble mission. A monarchy is feasible, she insisted, believing that they could provide stable leadership to Mexico. Taking up residence in Chapultepec Castle outside Mexico City in 1864, the couple tried to build support by appealing to both Catholic conservatives and Juárez's liberals. Their so-called balanced approach succeeded only in alienating both sides. Carlota was a major player because she presided over the Council of Ministers and held Sunday public audiences. Maximilian should have written about a man and a woman as the Empress. I prefer the baton while she prefers the drum. Political tides began to turn against the Mexican emperor and empress. After the U.S. Civil War ended, the United States began to more actively support the liberal government. Maximilian was left behind when Napoleon III withdrew French forces early in 1866. The new Belgian king, Leopold II, Carlota's brother, advised Maximilian to abdicate. But Carlota forbade it. Nothing can release us from our oath. Desperate to save their regime, Carlota took leave of Maximilian, not knowing that she would never see him again. She personally pleaded with Napoleon in Europe, but he advised abdication and refused to invest in the project. Hearing this, Carlota suffered a severe mental breakdown, believing that French assassins were trying to poison her. In Rome, she sought assistance from Pope Pius IX. During the interview with the pontiff, she attempted to spit out the poison. Carlota's breakdown. Her brothel Philip, Count of Flanders, was alarmed by her behavior and persuaded her to return to Miramare. Across the Atlantic, meanwhile, Maximilian and his soldiers were captured by Mexican forces in May 1867. Maximilian was executed by Mexican firing squad a month later. The emperor had passed away, ending his brief reign. Carlota's health deteriorated at Miramare, where she was cared for by her husband's family. She was diagnosed as insane by her doctors, who gave her fixed ideas about being persecuted. Carlota would eventually return to Belgium and her brothers, but her condition would not improve. Medicine was neither able to identify the cause of nor successfully treat her psychosis, even though she lived for another 60 years. The former empress died in 1927 in the 12th century Bouchout Castle, north of Brussels, after spending much of her life alone. One of the most heartbreaking episodes in the history of 19th century monarchy is the tragic tale of Carlota of Mexico, who was born Princess Charlotte of Belgium. It is a cautionary tale about the deadly intersection of idealism, imperial ambition, and the brutal realities of geopolitics. It is a story of dramatic rise and devastating fall, a human tragedy played out on the grandest of stages, as she goes from being a beloved, intellectually gifted princess in the courts of Europe to a heartbroken, mentally shattered widow who has lived alone for 6 decades. This is the story of a woman who, along with her husband, Archduke Maximilian of Austria, dared to believe that they could transplant the enlightened ideals of European liberalism onto the difficult and resistant soil of Mexico. However, their hopes were dashed when the forces of nationalism, realpolitik, and their own tragic miscalculations completely destroyed their plans. Carlota was a co-architect of this imperial fantasy, a fiercely intelligent and ambitious partner whose initial contentment and love gave way to a desperate, fanatical determination to save their doomed project, a determination that ultimately broke her mind. Carlota was not a passive consort. Rather, she was a co-architect of this imperial fantasy. Her life is a beautiful, hopeful dream that turned into a nightmare, leaving behind a legacy of death, madness, and the ruins of a castle by the sea where two young royals once plotted to change the world. Her life is a touching metaphor for the entire failed Mexican experiment. Contrary to her end, Carlota's beginnings were full of promise and privilege. She was Leopold I's only child and his favorite child when she was born in 1840 as Marie Charlotte Amélie Augustine Victoire Clementine Leopoldine. Her father's reign was marked by shrewd, delicate diplomacy aimed at securing Belgium's position among European powers, and the country itself was just 9 years old when she was born. Leopold's own personal history was marked by romantic tragedy. His first wife, Princess Charlotte of Wales, the only child of the future King George IV, had died in childbirth in 1817, a loss from which he never fully recovered. He paid tribute to this lost love by giving his daughter the name Charlotte, which would later be spelled Carlota in Spanish in Mexico. This gave the princess life a sense of legacy and perhaps a touch of melancholy from the beginning. Even though Carlota's mother, Queen Louise Marie, died of tuberculosis at the age of 10, accounts suggest that she had a happy childhood. King Leopold, who was now a widower, became very interested in his daughter. He took her on state business and taught her how to do politics and diplomacy personally. She learned statecraft from one of Europe's most cunning monarchs and was highly intelligent, well-read, and multilingual. She was further polished and exposed to the pinnacle of imperial power during the summer she spent with her cousin, Queen Victoria, at Windsor Castle. This unique upbringing produced not a docile princess, but a politically astute and confident young woman who expected to play a significant role in the world. She married the handsome and charming Archduke Maximilian, younger brother of Austrian Emperor Franz Joseph I, in 1857 with this expectation. At 17, she had achieved a rare feat for royalty, a love match. She was deeply attracted to Maximilian both intellectually and physically, admiring his liberal leanings and shared passion for reform, art, and science. However, Maximilian's initial impressions were more measured. In a letter to his brother, he noted that her formidable intelligence was a little concerning, hinting at the possibility of strong wills clashing. Despite this, they were a brilliant and glamorous couple who shared a common annoyance: the absence of a meaningful occupation. Maximilian was the spare, the younger brother of the emperor, who was forever marginalized and denied real power. Carlota resented her father's political ideas and the restricted position of decorative archduchess. They desired their own throne as a canvas on which to depict a benevolent, enlightened monarchy. When Franz Joseph made Maximilian viceroy of the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia, a region that was struggling under Austrian rule, they had their first chance. Carlota saw the thorns and the possibility of satisfaction from doing something good. At the same time, they tried a policy of reform and conciliation to win over Italian nationalists with autonomy and cultural respect, true to their ideals. This directly went against Franz Joseph's and the Viennese court's desire for a rigid approach. When conflict with Piedmont Sardinia, backed by France's Napoleon III, erupted in 1859, Maximilian's hesitant leadership led to a humiliating demotion. Austria lost Lombardy, and the couple's first grand political project ended in failure and disgrace. Retreating to the Adriatic coast, they sought solace in building Miramare, a stunning fairy tale castle overlooking the sea. Carlota enjoyed painting, playing the piano, and designing the lush gardens for a time. However, Miramare turned into a gilded cage. Their inability to produce an heir became a source of profound personal and political anguish, and rumors of Maximilian's infidelity and visits to brothels began to circulate. Cracks began to appear in their marriage. The castle, which was supposed to be a haven, turned into a beautiful prison where they waited for fate to call, a symbol of their stalled ambitions. That call was disguised as an opportunity and came from across the Atlantic. Since its independence from Spain in 1821, liberal and conservative factions in Mexico had been at odds for decades. Benito Juárez, the liberal president, had stopped paying off the country's debts abroad, which gave Europe a reason to step in. In order to gain access to Mexican silver and counter Protestant Anglo-Saxon influence, Napoleon III of France invaded the Americas in 1862. After occupying Mexico City, he needed a plausible European figurehead to legitimize his puppet regime. A crown was offered by conservative exiles from Mexico in an effort to overturn Juárez's reforms. Maximilian, with his royal blood, liberal reputation, and thirst for purpose, seemed the perfect candidate. This was more than just an adventure for Carlota. It was a divine mission and a noble cause to bring peace and modern European civilization to a troubled land. She had been looking for a meaningful role all her life. They accepted the offer, but under conditions that revealed a fatal naivety. Beware of the scheme, Franz Joseph advised his brother to get a popular mandate and ensured that the French would support the military for a long time. A fictitious referendum was set up by Napoleon III, who falsely presented overwhelming support from Mexicans. Assured of this backing and blinded by their own idealism, the couple embarked for Mexico in 1864. They entered a nation that was deeply divided. Juárez's Republican forces controlled a significant portion of the countryside and viewed them as invaders from abroad. From their residence in Chapultepec Castle, they attempted a policy of conciliation, trying to appeal to both conservatives and liberals. They upheld Juárez's key secularizing reforms, alienating the Catholic Church and the conservatives who had invited them. Simultaneously, they were forever seen by liberals as illegitimate tools of French imperialism. Carlota put a lot of effort into her role and may have become the more political-minded and determined of the two. In order to garner support, she presided over the Council of Ministers, gave public speeches, and traveled extensively. She saw herself as a partner in rule, later writing, "Maximilian should have written about a man and a woman as the Empress. She prefers the drum but I prefer the baton." However, the geopolitical tides were shifting against them. The Second Mexican Empire was doomed when the American Civil War ended in 1865. The United States, now free to enforce the Monroe Doctrine, began funneling money and weapons to Juárez and pressured Napoleon III to withdraw his troops. Beginning in 1866, Napoleon abandoned his Mexican venture due to mounting costs and domestic opposition, cutting off the imperial couple's crucial military and financial lifeline. Maximilian, vacillating and despairing, was advised by Carlota's brother, the new Belgian King Leopold II, to abdicate. But Carlota would not hear of it. Her resolve became ferocious as her determination grew stronger. She declared, "Nothing can free us from our oath." In a last, desperate gamble, she sailed for Europe alone in the summer of 1866 to personally plead with Napoleon III and the Pope. She finally lost her sanity during this mission. In Paris, a dismissive Napoleon III, focused on European affairs, coldly advised abdication and refused further aid. The rejection was a shattering blow to her entire worldview. The stress, isolation, and terror of the previous years converged into a profound psychotic break. In a meeting with the emperor, she became paranoid, convinced she was being poisoned. Her grandiose and erratic behavior got worse. She went to Rome to plead with Pope Pius XII for help, but during an audience, she fell into a full-blown coma, tried to spit out fictitious poison from the water she was given, and yelled about plans to kill her. She ended up in the care of doctors after being physically restrained. She was just 26 years old. Back in Mexico, a doomed Maximilian, swayed by a sense of honor and perhaps a desire to die as an emperor rather than flee as a failure, refused to abandon his post. In May 1867, Republican forces took him hostage at Querétaro. Despite international pleas for clemency, he was executed by firing squad on June 19, 1867. The news was kept from the already shattered Carlota for some time. Her long life was only half over. Repatriated to Europe, she would live for another 60 years, until 1927, confined first in Miramare Castle, and then in the Castle of Bouchout in Belgium. She was taken care of by dedicated staff, but she was still lost in a world of delusion. She often thought she was still the Empress of Mexico, waiting for Maximilian to return or to host dignitaries from other countries. The brilliant, ambitious princess who had once advised kings and governed ministers was reduced to a ghost of her former self, a living monument to a shattered dream. The story of Carlota is the story of a heart and mind broken by the collision of high ideals with ruthless reality. She and Maximilian were willing participants in a massive, flawed experiment, not puppets. Their sincere belief in their civilizing mission ultimately contributed to their tragic demise. Carlota's particular tragedy was that she, the more politically astute and strong-willed of the pair, saw the enterprise not as a cynical power grab but as a sacred duty. Her mind was unable to withstand the devastation when the structure of that duty gave way, taking with it her husband, her status, and her sense of purpose. Her life serves as a constant reminder of the human cost of empire, the fragility of mental health, and the terrible cost of pursuing a dream beyond reason. Carlota of Belgium, born Marie Charlotte Amélie Auguste Victoire Clementine Léopoldine on June 7, 1840, emerged into a world of promise and privilege as the only daughter of King Leopold I of Belgium and his second wife, Queen Louise of Orleans. And though her early years were defined by refinement, education, and the gilded surroundings of Belgian royalty, her life would later unravel into one of the most tragic royal sagas of the 19th century. For the young princess who grew up as her father's favorite, admired for her sharp intellect, striking beauty, and devotion to study, would eventually marry Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian of Austria, the younger brother of Emperor Franz Joseph I, and together they would be thrust into an ill-fated imperial experiment across the ocean as Emperor and Empress of Mexico, where politics, betrayal, and international ambitions broke not only their empire but Carlota's very mind. Carlota was shaped by loss and high expectations from a young age. Her mother died when she was only 10 years old, leaving her to find solace in her father's attention and her books. King Leopold, who was known as the Nestor of Europe for his shrewd diplomacy and connections across royal courts, gave his daughter the attention he couldn't always give to his sons. He taught her statecraft, introduced her to politics, and took her on formal visits that Leopold had named her Charlotte in memory of his first wife, Princess Charlotte of Wales, daughter of King George IV of Britain, who had died in childbirth in 1817, a loss that haunted him for life. However, the new Charlotte, who was later referred to as Carlota in Spanish lands, seemed to embody a rebirth of promise.